Hello, everyone, and welcome to Madrid EUDC 2021. My name is Isabel, and as all you should know, I am one of the co-governors of these Euros. We're so happy to have you all here, not only online and virtually connecting, but also those that could have had the time to come here offline. We have been preparing all Euros with all our heart and our efforts, and we would like to thank first for these Euros. First, the old team that is with us, starting with the ad score team, then the tabulation team, equity team, language team, for sure, all the outcome team, and also the staff team and all the people that is involved in these Euros. And because of these people, because of them, this edition of Euros can be held, I can be hosted here in Spain. But most important, we would like to welcome you to the University Rey Juan Carlos, which is the hosting university. And also we would like to thank the debating club of Universidad Rey Juan Carlos, who is also hosting these Euros this time for the first time ever in Spain. We would like then, we would like to thank all our sponsors, which is Iberia, our airline company. Then we would like to thank Lugo City, and also, we would like to thank the regional government of Madrid, the City Council of Madrid, and the Spanish government, the national Spanish government. Thank you to the president of the chief, president of the government, and also thank you to the Secretary of State of Digitalization and Artificial Intelligence, because without them, we wouldn't have been able to host this new edition of Euros. So first of all, we would like to introduce the sponsors. So please, let's go with the videos and the welcoming videos from the principal of the university and the rest of the speakers.
Welcome to the Rey Juan Carlos University. We are very proud of the initiative of our students and alumni organizing this kind of events. Our university has a large presence of international students. It is our wish that all participants, even those remotely connected, enjoy the Rey Juan Carlos experience. Hope you enjoy this phase.
La vida es un gran camino lleno de idas y vueltas. A veces nos aleja de lo que queremos.
Hello, everybody. The videos will be in very, very soon. Thank you for being there.
Otras consigue llevarnos a donde...
Welcome to the Rey Juan Carlos University. We are very proud of the initiative of our students and alumni organizing this kind of events. Our university has a large presence of international students. It is our wish that all participants Welcome to the Rey Juan Carlos University. We are very proud of the initiative of our students and alumni organizing this kind of events. Our university has a large presence of international students. It is our wish that all participants, even those remotely connected, enjoy the Rey Juan Carlos experience. Hope you enjoy this phase.
La vida es un gran camino lleno de idas y vueltas. A veces nos aleja de lo que queremos, otras consigue llevarnos a donde realmente nos gusta estar. Yo quiero recorrer un trozo de esa senda llamada vida, un viaje por las diferentes rutas jacobeas que cruzan la provincia de Lugo, para descubrir un camino mágico, repleto de historias y encuentros inesperados. En la vida transitamos por cientos de caminos, aunque los más importantes son los que dejan huella, los que hacen que una amistad perdure para siempre.
Representantes del Comité Organizador del Campeonato Europeo de Debate, participantes en este Campeonato Europeo de Debate, bienvenidos a Madrid, aunque sea de forma virtual. Todavía por las circunstancias de la pandemia no podemos, aunque nos hubiera encantado, poder hacer de manera presencial este Campeonato Europeo de Debate aquí, en la ciudad de Madrid. Pero eso no quiere decir que renunciemos a la organización y que, por tanto, que se pueda llevar a cabo aún en circunstancias diferentes. Ni tampoco quiere decir que no pongáis venir a Madrid. Os invito, como alcalde de Madrid, a que nos visitéis, a que disfrutéis de los encantos de esta ciudad, a que disfrutéis de nuestra cultura, de nuestro ocio, de nuestra gastronomía, de nuestra forma de vida. Y, por cierto, si el debate es oratoria, argumentación, pensamiento crítico, la capacidad de enfrentar posiciones, pero también la capacidad de poder llegar a acuerdos, no hay mejor ciudad que Madrid. Porque Madrid es una ciudad en la que uno es de cualquier sitio. Venimos de cualquier parte del mundo, son muy pocos los que hemos nacido aquí y al mismo tiempo, sin embargo, tenemos la capacidad, desde nuestras diferencias, desde nuestros debates, de poder convivir en común y creo que de ser un ejemplo de sociedad. Por eso, cuando se celebra este Campeonato Europeo de Debate, tenemos que echar la mirada atrás a ese Campeonato Mundial que celebramos en el año 2013 o a todos aquellos madrileños, que hay varios, que han sido precisamente campeones mundiales de debate. Una disciplina y una modalidad difícil, ¿qué os va a decir un político que se ve sometido a debate de forma continua y constante? Pero en la que hay tres cuestiones que son esenciales, tanto la capacidad oratoria, la capacidad de argumentación, como el pensamiento crítico que debe sustentar precisamente esa oratoria y esa argumentación. Y tenemos una gran posibilidad en Madrid de disfrutar de este arte entre el 1 y el 7 de agosto, con todos aquellos que vais a participar, porque la juventud es nuestro futuro. Si la juventud no tiene futuro, la sociedad no tiene futuro. Si la juventud no tiene futuro, Madrid no tiene futuro. Por tanto, es imprescindible que pongamos los instrumentos necesarios para que el talento joven vaya emergiendo y para que vayáis conquistando esas parcelas de la sociedad que también os corresponden y que forman parte ya de vuestras responsabilidades en un momento tan crítico de la historia como el que estamos viviendo como consecuencia de la pandemia. Os diría que mucha suerte, que gane el mejor y que gane el que mejor defienda sus principios y convicciones. No, que gane el que mejor defienda la posición que le ha tocado defender, con independencia de si la comparte o no lo comparte, porque ahí está precisamente la esencia del debate, en la capacidad de argumentar, de tener ese pensamiento crítico, aun cuando no se comparta lo que uno está defendiendo. Y por tanto, mucha suerte a todos y que gane aquel que mejor defienda lo que le toque, con independencia de que lo comparta o no lo comparta. Muchas gracias.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a new edition of the European Universities Debating Championship 2021. It is a pleasure for me and for all the people who have made this event possible that Madrid hosts this very special edition of this championship. A meeting thanks to which we will be able to enjoy the best young talent and the brightest minds in Europe. Young people who stand out for their preparation, their knowledge, and their ability to expose and confront ideas through logic and argumentation. Skills that make them unique individuals destined to achieve great things. In addition to welcoming you to this exciting event, I would like to speak briefly about the work we do at the Secretary of State for Digitalization and Artificial Intelligence of the government in Spain. We work to promote and develop the digital transformation in our country, a fundamental process for the progress of our country and the economic and social reconstruction we are facing after the impact of the pandemic. A task that we face with the utmost commitment to citizens and from a human-centered vision of technology. We believe that technology must be at the service of people, promoting social inclusion and strengthening a welfare state that guarantees equal opportunities for all. Because it is each one of us, with our talent and effort, who are making the difference and building the new digital society that will mark our lives from now on. That is why one of our main priorities is to create a secure and reliable digital environment that guarantees citizens' rights. An environment that respects the democratic values of our society and allows all citizens to access technology on equal terms. It is therefore necessary to update citizens' rights and obligations, ensuring respect for shared values and removing uncertainties about what cannot be done or can be done in a digitalized world. This is the only way to move towards a truly democratic digitalization that reaches the people who need it most, especially the young people who are called to lead the world of tomorrow. With this objective in mind, the Spanish government has launched the Charter of Digital Rights, an initiative by which we want to face the great challenges, risks, and uncertainties posed by the adaptation of current rights to the digital reality. A document that is not normative, but descriptive and prospective, and that includes a set of principles and rights to guide future regulatory projects and the development of public policies. In this sense, the text includes 6 main categories of rights. Freedom rights, referring to the right not to be traced and profiled, as well as the right to cybersecurity or to digital inheritance. Equality rights, which we include, for example, the right to non-discrimination or universal access to technology. Rights of participation and shaping of the public space. Workplace and business environment rights, including the right, among others, to digital disconnection. Digital rights in specific environments, such as artificial intelligence or neurotechnologies, including, for example, the right not to be discriminated by an algorithm. The goal is therefore to guarantee the protection of individual and collective rights in the new digital scenarios, a major step to move forward to a human-centered conception of technology that puts people at the center of our priorities. I'm sharing this work with you. I'm sharing this Charter for Digital Rights initiative to you, the young people, because I think you are the ones to lead this change. Finally, I would like to say good luck to all in this next championship. It is a moment of learning and enjoyment that I hope you will all remember forever. We look forward to seeing you at the next event, the World University Debating Championship in 2023, this time in Madrid in person. Enjoy the championship and thank you very much for your attention.
Hello, I am Manuel Castells, Minister of Universities of the Spanish government, and it is my pleasure to share one word, with the participants in this important event in which students from all European universities are going to debate and clarify ideas, concepts, projects, dreams, problems. Um, the university as such, it's by definition a space of public debate and of critical thinking. And therefore, these debates and this competition, which takes place today and the coming days, it's fully at the heart of the university mission. And therefore, I wish you not only good luck, but more important, that you use the ideas and interaction in this debate to improve your personal relationship to the scholarly community, your projects, your work, your intellectual development, and your networks of friendship.
Good morning and welcome everybody to Madrid EUDC 2021. Whether it's online or offline, it is our utmost pleasure to have you all here. However, especially as ORCOM, we cannot proceed without emphasizing how happy we are that some of you have been able to join us here in Madrid. But to those of you who would have loved to come but have not been able to, we're more than happy if this format has made UDC a little bit more accessible to the community. If COVID-19 is the reason, then let's be patient and trust the process. And to those who love the online experiences, in a certain way, it is thanks to you that COVID-19 has not stopped debating from happening. So thank you very much. And now some very, very important things that we need everybody to know. This is the briefing from ORCOM. Number one is that we would like to introduce you to our staff team. They will be checking that everything is okay and on time in the different rooms, so you will often see them popping into the rooms to ensure good coordination and timing. Just don't be scared and be respectful to them, please. Number two, we know that online tournaments often add some stress to participants because of their format, so we would like to run through the different steps and the different periods and phases we'll be going through. So please, first of all, wait until the draw is released on Discord. Okay, this will be very clear stated in the announcements channel. When the draw is released, you will get the link to your Zoom room via private message. It is very important that you log into your Zoom account with the email provided to Tab, and that you do that in the period of time in between the draw and the motion. All right? Not doing so won't impede the speaker from participating, but will probably cause some delays that we would like to avoid. Also, when everybody or the swing teams are ready, the debates will start. The process then is just as usual, but it is worth noting that once they're over, judges will have to stay in their rooms and speaker will move back to the Zoom lobby. Then when their deliberation is over, they'll go back to the lobby and one of the wings will tell the speakers to go back to the breakout room. That's all from ORCOM. Thank you so much for participating. We're more than happy to have you here. Mira aquí. Just give us a short minute and we'll start with briefings, okay? Please, we would like to proceed with the tab briefing. So as soon as one of the tab members can speak, we'll be good. Alex, your mic is off.
Thank you. Sorry about that, Alessandra. Okay, hi, try that again. Okay, great. So I think some of this has been covered by Orcom, but I'll just go over it quickly to make sure we all have the information we need. So we're going to be using Discord for announcements and check-in at the start of each day. You press the green button to check in. Hopefully most of you have done this already, as the deadline was 3 minutes ago. Great. If it takes a couple of minutes to get the message from the bot, please just wait, just give it a couple of minutes rather than pressing the button over and over again, which will just overwhelm the bot. Please just be patient. We'll also be using Zoom for debates. Please match your names to what is on tab. So for example, if you're a judge, please put like Lucia Ars, and if you're a team member, please put like Emma Lucas Leiden A. You can also rename yourself if you're trying to get moved between rooms. So if I was trying to get moved into room Madrid 9, I could add that to my name to make it easier for the team to move me. You don't have to do this, but it generally speeds things up. Links to your Zoom calls will be sent out by the bot at the start of each round. Please join calls immediately after these links are sent out. This means you'll be automatically allocated into the correct breakout room. If you don't join the call immediately, then A, it gives us less time to resolve it if there are any issues with you logging in. We'll also start to issue swing teams in your space, which is a headache for you if they turn up before you and you can't speak, and a headache for us if we've notified swing teams for no reason. Also, because if you get automatically allocated, it means you'll definitely be there for the start of your debate, whereas if we're relying on people to move you across, it might take longer and you might miss the start of your debate. So please just join Zoom calls immediately. You need to be logged into an account to be able to access these calls. That shouldn't be an issue. You all gave us the Zoom emails linked to your accounts when you registered. Please just make sure you're logged in. Otherwise, again, it might cause a delay for you trying to join your call. After the debates, please go back into the main rooms, out of your breakout room, and wait there until your judge comes back in for feedback. Judges, chairs, please make sure only the participants you're expecting are in the room at the start of each debate. So obviously that's, your panel and also the 8 speakers. Your private URLs are sent out by the bot at the start of each round, and also you should have got them already. These are private. Please don't share them with anybody else. If you share them with somebody else, they will be able to submit feedback and ballots pretending to be you, and we will not be able to tell the difference. So please, please, please don't screen share, don't send it with anybody else, anything like that. If someone needs a private URL, they can contact us and we'll sort it. Judges, please submit ballots using your private URLs after 15 minutes. We need every voting judge, so that's every wing and the chair, but not trainees, to submit an e-ballot each round. Chairs, please make sure everybody in your room submits a ballot. You should all do it at the same time for simplicity. Also, please make sure everyone in your room understands how to submit ballots. If that means you need to talk them through it or share your screen, please do so. One of the great things about an online EUDC is that there are lots of people here who haven't judged before, which is great, but it means they might not be quite as experienced using the software, so please just make sure all of your rooms' ballots are submitted and that they are all identical. That means that the speaking order needs to be identical, the team points need to be identical, like the rankings in the debate. Please get the rankings in the debate correct, and also the speaker points for all 8 speakers need to be identical. Also, if there are any swings or iron persons, you need to mark that. Details on how to mark that is in the tech guide, so please check that. But also, because apparently lots of people don't read the tech guide, very quickly, if you have a swing or an iron person in your room, you need to select from the drop-down menu, there are duplicate speeches in this room. Then, if a team has been replaced by a swing team, you tick both speeches as having been duplicate speeches, and it doesn't matter which speakers you set, because we'll know that it's a swing team. If there was an iron person in that room, so if one person spoke for both speeches, please set both speakers to the person who actually spoke, and tick the lower speech, only one speech, as a duplicate speech. Thanks. You also submit feedback using private URLs. This is for wings and chairs to submit feedback on each other. Trainees, if there's something especially important that you want to bring to the CA team's attention, there's a Google form that's been posted in announcements that you can use to do that. You know, if there's something especially urgent, obviously you can also post in Ask CA and ask a CA team member to DM you. You don't need to submit feedback. Trainees don't need to submit feedback every round. If you have nothing routine to say, if your feedback is, yeah, they're a pretty good chair, you probably don't need to submit that. But if your feedback is, I thought they were biased, or they shouted at a volunteer, or something like that, please do submit feedback using the Google form. Please don't DM individual tab team members. Please post in the Ask Tab channel on Discord. This is because we can't always guarantee that we each respond individually to everyone who messages us, if nothing else because some members of our team aren't working every day and we're trading off which days we work. So please just post in Ask Tab. If something is confidential, just be like, hey, can someone DM me? And then one of us will resolve it. But otherwise it might just sit in our inbox and your query might not get resolved. Great. For language status, I think there are a few interviews pending, so we'll tell you when everybody should check their language status, probably day 2. If you want to change your status, then please contact the language team. Like if you think you should be ESL and you're not, you need to talk to language directly about that. However, if you were told by the language team that you are ESL and you're not on the tab, then it's at that point you should message us. Also, just a reminder, ESL and EPL people, please check your language status. Sometimes there are mistakes. If EPL people don't check their language status, we're more likely to miss things and potentially even break the wrong teams. Please don't do that. It will be really embarrassing for us, and we will be really annoyed at you. Okay. Anything else to add? I'm the only one on here. Okay, thanks. Any questions? Please post in Ask tab. Thanks.
Okay, so now we're going to start with the speakers briefing by the adjudication core. Hi everyone, I'm Lucia and I'm one of the chief adjudicators of this edition of Madrid EUDC 2021. We're very excited to have you here and we hope that you enjoy the rest of the tournament. I'm going to be starting with the speakers briefing. Okay, so speakers briefing for Madrid EUDC 2021. This briefing is supposed to only represent a brief outline of what debating at Madrid EUDC is supposed to be like. I'm gonna be mostly talking about, firstly, a quick overview of debating and the BP format. Secondly, about speaker roles, their importance and what happens when you don't fulfill them. Thirdly, about the role of top half in setting the debate. Then after that, about the back half. Lastly, about engagement in terms of debate meta-related things. And lastly, I'm going to be talking about feedback and what you can do in terms of getting feedback and also submitting feedback. As a brief outline of debating on the BP format, overall, the aim in a round is to persuade the judge panel that the motion should be affirmed or rejected within the rules of BP debating. Only the arguments that are said in the round matter, so it doesn't matter if individual speakers or judges feel like one side is more persuasive, it is only what is said in the round that matters. Judges also are supposed to be representing average informed voters. This term is especially important and causes a lot of confusion sometimes, but overall, what we take it to mean is that you are a voter across the world that's reasonably informed, that can understand complex argumentation, and that has knowledge of current events, that it means that they know what has happened in the front page of the newspaper. Overall, that means that teams aren't required to absolutely prove literally every single fact that they say, but rather that they are able to rely on judges knowing some facts about the world and use those in order to further advance the argumentation. Lastly, in BP debating is a comparative game, but also one where there's more than just 2 teams, there's 4. So teams need to try and show that an argument is true, that an argument is also important, and that also that an argument is more important than other things in the debate. In BP debating, as mentioned earlier, but hopefully you all know this format given that you are speaking at the European Debating Championships, there's 4 teams, 2 of them on side government and 2 of them on side opposition. The speakers on side government are divided into 2 halves, the top half with opening government and the back half with closing government. And the same is true for the teams in opening opposition and in closing opposition. Teams on the same bench can't speak to each other during prep time and are actually independent teams. So even though they're on the same side and debating in favor or against of the same things, They're still supposed to beat the other team and show that they are the team that should win the debate. That means that teams on the back half are supposed to advance different argumentation and also show why that argumentation is better than the argumentation of the team in the same bench as them, in addition to just, responding to the arguments of the other side. In terms of speaker roles, and this is just to clarify some of the things that are important in terms of roles in BP debating. In opening government, you have two speakers, the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister. The role of the Prime Minister is to set the debate and to begin the case for their team. The Deputy Prime Minister continues the case and also responds to criticisms regarding the setting of the debate and also their own argumentation. The setting of the debate is quite important. This is a role that is unique to Prime Minister, and if it doesn't happen then it is too late afterwards, but we're going to talk about that further. Second team in the debate is opening opposition, which has two speakers, leader of opposition and deputy leader of opposition. The roles that we want to highlight regarding opening opposition is the leader of opposition defines challenges gets to challenge the frame or the model of the. It also has the capacity to set a counterprop, and they set the case and respond. The important thing is that only the leader of opposition is able to challenge the frame or the model initially, and if they don't do that, it's too late afterwards. And also the leader of opposition, if they are doing a counterprop, so an alternative proposal to what the government is doing to fix the same problem, they also need to set it out in the leader of opposition speech, so it can't come out in, for example, member of opposition or web speaker. Deputy leader of opposition also has the job to continue the case and respond. After those two teams have gone through, then is the entrance of closing government. Closing government has two speakers, the member of government and the government whip. The member of government extends on opening government, and it is their duty to provide that extension. If it's not providing in opening government, the whip can't actually provide that. The job of the whip is to whip the extension and overall summarize the debate, and it's supposed to provide a bias summary that makes them win. That entails both whipping their own argumentation and explaining why it's more important and analyzing it more, as well as responding to arguments that were presented by the other side or weighing their material against the top half. The most important thing to highlight in whip is that they're not supposed to be new arguments presented. So new material in whips is not supposed to be counted, but we're also going to talk about that further later on. Basically, the exact same thing happens in closing opposition, except from the other side. The last thing that I want to highlight in speaker roles are three things that are integral to each speaker, or to all speakers rather. Firstly, is that speakers also have the job of being consistent with their team and with themselves. When a contradiction is found, the first statement is taken as true rather than both existing at the same time. This is because it's very unfair to expect teams on the other side to be able to respond to arguments that are essentially completely different, because that obviously would change the response and makes it quite unfair. Additionally, it's just quite unpersuasive generally to run two contradicting arguments. Secondly, their job of speakers is also to take and to offer POIs. And lastly, they need to do this within the time that has been allocated to them, so that's within 7 minutes. In terms of what happens when you fail to fulfill your speaker role, and this obviously is highlighted to judges in judging manual, judge tests, and answer to judge test, and also will be in the judge's briefing. But I think it's important that speakers are also aware of the penalties that they may incur if they fail at any of these roles. So normally what happens when you fail to fulfill your speaker role is that you lose the advantage that you would have gained by that failure. So for example, you may think that not taking a POI may result in you having a bit more time for your own argumentation, and that therefore that's a net gain for you. So therefore, what judges ought to do is to remove that advantage. So failure to take a POI can result in an important factor in close calls, because it means that you are not engaging properly with teams on the diagonal, and judges may choose to punish it as if the team in the diagonal had delivered a particularly incisive POI. Adding new arguments in whip, again, may seem tempting, given that that means that no one can respond to them, but that's precisely why it's unfair, and therefore why that advantage is removed, and therefore you get no credit for new material that is added in whip. If you speak for over 7 minutes, there's no credit for anything given after 7:15, And if there's a contradiction, again, the first statement is counted. And additionally, it undermines the team's overall contributions. In terms of setting the debate, which, as I mentioned earlier, is part of the role of the opening government, and in the cases of counter-proper definition challenges, opening opposition. So firstly, opening government gets to decide the debate in Prime Minister, but only in Prime Minister. Secondly, debates occur in functional democracies. It is important that we understand that motions are not supposed to be set in places where they can't be set, right? So you can't say that motions, that the reason we shouldn't do this motion is because it wouldn't work in, for example, rogue states or states that don't have a functioning government, because obviously the debate can take place there and it is unfair to the other side. So it takes place in, the vast majority of the world, which composes of functional democracies. I want to highlight this specifically. This does not mean that you get to exclude developing nations. Developing nations have functioning governments, and even if they are, still developing or less rich than, for example, the United States, that doesn't mean that their government is not functional. That doesn't mean that they don't have the capacity to implement policy. And suggesting otherwise is, I think, very unrealistic to what happens in the world. So overall, debates occur in functional democracies doesn't mean you get to exclude developing nations and set it all in, for example, European states or the UK and the USA. Thirdly, debates cannot be place or time set. This is important because it means that you cannot set a debate in uniquely one country. So if, for example, this house would nationalize all cat shelters, you can't necessarily say that that's only going to happen in Slovakia. You can't place set it. You also cannot time set it. So you cannot say that this will, for example, occur only for like a month before removing it, or that this would have occurred in 1994. It needs to be in the current time that we're speaking of. Additionally, debates ought to also be defined in a reasonable way. The manual, I think, is a bit, or rather, on this, we sort of do rely on themes. It's very hard to come up with a definition that literally applies for all debates, right? So we do rely on opening government themes to an extent, define debates reasonably. By that, it means that an average informed voter would be able to look at the motion and think that what the OG said that the motion is pretty much what the motion means. So, for example, in the example that was used in the Athens briefing, is this house would not allow prisoners to vote. A reasonable interpretation is to not allow prisoners to vote. An unreasonable interpretation would be to say that you also would be to say, for example, for the opening opposition team, to say the definition should also include, or rather for the opening government to say that they wouldn't allow prisoners under 18 to vote, because that's functionally just children, and that obviously adult prisoners would still get to vote. So debates ought to be defined in a reasonable way, that reasonable individuals would be able to look at the debate and think that that's what the motion entails, but also that do allow for both sides to be able to argue the debate. Having said that, most debates are defined reasonably because no one wants to have a definition debate. They're kind of boring, and definitions should generally stand. We discourage generally teams attempting to wrangle a small advantage by getting into a definition debate. But if the setup is actually unfair, like in the motion just highlighted, opposition can challenge the definitions in leader of opposition. Opposition is additionally also able to set a counter model, and this is just a thing that they have the capacity to do. It means that they have equal fiat as opening government to do something else. So, for example, if opening government wants to pass the policy of nationalizing cat shelters, opening opposition may run a counter policy of what they would do with the same amount of political capital and money. This doesn't mean that opening opposition gets to just propose whatever they want, because they need to show that the political capital they would expend on their alternative policy or the money is basically equivalent. So that's in terms of roles that are specific to the top half. In terms of the back half, there's a bunch of things that we want to highlight for speakers. Firstly, regarding extensions. As I mentioned earlier, extension speakers are supposed to bring new argumentation and new material. This can mean different things. It can mean completely new arguments that weren't seen in the top half before. It can mean new responses. It can mean new examples or new analysis or explanations or mechanisms of arguments that are already on the table. and they can then explain why that analysis is better than the analysis that was in top half. It can be new weighing, new framing, or new impacts. The most important thing is that those arguments need to be, or rather those lines need to be things that were not said in top half, and that overall, in order for the back half to win, those arguments need to, or those lines of analysis need to be more important or better than the ones that were seen in the top half, which is why weighing is particularly important. Weighing overall means top half teams ought to, in theory, explain why their arguments are more important than the argument in top half. There's two things that I want to highlight here. Firstly, is that although weighing is important, straight up rebutting your opening is not allowed, because in the rules of BP, that just would generally disadvantage opening teams. So you're not allowed to just knife your opening under the guise of weighing. You're, of course, allowed to explain why it is that you think their arguments are less important than yours, but this needs to be done in a balance, and straight up rebutting your opening is not allowed. The second thing is that although weighing is obviously a very good avenue for you to win the debate, it is also, for judges, not necessarily a reason, like a lack of weighing does not entail into you automatically losing to your opening. Your arguments may still be deemed more impactful or more important, but that's definitely something that teams should strive to have in their content. Lastly, in terms of the whip. So as I said, the overall role of whips means that they shouldn't be bringing new material in. I think that term is also quite vague, so just to break it down a little bit, by new material, what we mean is new arguments. So things like responses to existing arguments, to adding mechanisms or analyzing existing mechanisms of existing arguments where the impact is clear, adding new examples to existing argumentation, adding new framing to existing argumentation are all still allowed. But overall, if whips are adding things that could not have reasonably been inferred or discussed from what was talked about in their member speech or in the rest of the debate, then that's a new argumentation and should not be counted, and judges will not be counting that. In terms of engagement, engagement can be seen in many forms, because obviously in BP debating with 4 teams, it's a game of comparatives, but also a game of seeing how teams interact with each other. That means that things like engagement, like weighing, like framing, like POIs, these can all be counted as teams interacting with other teams. Stating the opposite of an argument doesn't necessarily equal good engagement. That would sometimes entail that teams say the net effect of this is good for these 5 reasons, and the other side saying that the net effect of this is bad for these other 4 reasons doesn't necessarily mean that they're engaging with each other, because they can just be stating different things. But those 4 and 5 reasons may just never actually interact with each other and be completely different and separate, like ships passing in the night. So it is important that you're actually engaging and discussing and addressing directly the arguments of the other side, rather than just, blitzing for your own. Ignoring an argument is also not necessarily a reason why an argument would become unimportant. So just because, for example, opening government chooses to run a purely principle case and the rest of the teams choose to run a practical argument, that doesn't mean that, no one engaged with OG and therefore OG should fourth. It's more no one engaged with OG, which means that their arguments remain standing. So it doesn't mean that arguments become unimportant, so we encourage teams to still engage. Back half teams, equally, have a duty to engage with their openings. This is particularly important given that, top half teams essentially don't have the opportunity to respond to them or to really see their case fully. So therefore, this can happen in 2 ways. Firstly, by offering POIs during top half, so that opening teams have a chance to respond to you, but also by giving POIs out or accepting POIs from opening government and opening opposition teams, which allows them to directly rebut your material or to try and insert their argumentation against and weigh against your arguments. So this is quite important, and as we said earlier, particularly in diagonals, in close comparisons, it will be taken into account, so please give and take POIs. They will be used as a tiebreaker, and it's quite important in diagonals. Just to quickly talk about some motion types that you might be seeing, we don't know, at Madrid EUDC. You might be seeing this house wood. This house wood is a policy motion. it assumes that the state is implementing something, and therefore it assumes that opening government has the capacity to do it. So lines from the opposition that this would never happen in the real world are not persuasive. This assumes that government has the capacity to. Motions this House believes that are analysis motions, and in these ones, you aren't supposed to show that you know you can do it, or that if you implement this policy in the real world, what are the real life consequences of that, even though obviously explaining why this House believes that X policy is good would constitute you analyzing why it would be good if you implemented it. It's about arguing for the truth of the statement, so whether it is true or not. This House supports and this House opposes are similar to this House beliefs. So for example, this House supports cats. You would explain why you support them. So you'd analyze again the truth of the statement or why you oppose them. Next motion type is this House prefers a world in which you are comparing the world to the status quo. So for example, this House prefers a world in which we will have superpowers. In that, you would be comparing that to the status quo. So opening opposition cannot come out and say, actually, we would prefer a world in which space travel exists and half of the population are actually just aliens. This House prefers a world that needs to be compared directly to the status quo. That's a comparative. The other type of world comparative debate is this House prefers X to Y, in which the government defends X and the opposition defends Y. So this House prefers to have superpowers than to have technology so advanced it's indistinguishable from magic. Thus, or the two things that both sides have to defend. Opposition cannot come out and decide that they want to defend Z or another one. Another debate that you can have is that this House regrets debate. So for example, this House regrets the invention of the internet is a retrospective motion. That means that you have to present a counterfactual on what you think the world would have looked like if that had never happened. And that's the bits that you are comparing, a world with this and a world without this, and explain why, therefore you regret it. Another motion that you may have is an actor motion. This House, as Mary Sue, would. These actor motions are slightly different from this House believes that, for example, because you're arguing from the perspective of an actor. So it's different from this House believes that Mary Sue should. In which case you can say that, you know, she should do it just because it's better for the world and the universe and it's moral. Whereas in an actor motion, you're arguing from their own perspective. In terms of feedback, and this is the last bit that I'm going to talk about before moving into judges. Asking for feedback as a team is something that you are and should and are completely entitled to do. Chair judges and panel judges should be providing you for individual feedback if asked. It is, you know, their job as chair judges and why they're here. Part of the role of Euros is to be, you know, an educational experience. But also please be considerate of time zones and availability. Some of our judges are joining us from far away. So just because someone doesn't reply, give them a little bit of time because they may just be asleep somewhere else. The second thing that I want to highlight is in terms of sending feedback, please do it. You can submit feedback on your chair judges via Tavicat. And if you want to submit feedback on a panelist that you talked to and who was very helpful, please do it in comments. We read every single piece of submitted feedback, and your feedback does matter, is valuable, and will matter in future allocations. So if you thought a judge was particularly good or particularly bad and are upset that then in future rounds, you know, they're still chairing and judging, or alternatively, they haven't been promoted or something like that, you can definitely help make that change via submitting feedback. Please also follow the scales. We would be posting the scales for that very soon. And obviously, we'd like to thank previous adjudication teams from Korea, Thailand, Athens, Novi Sad, Warsaw, upon whose work the sky is based, and many others whose contributions have gradually added up to this briefing. And yeah, thank you very much. And we are excited to have you join us at Madrid EUDC. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now proceed with the equity briefing.
A judge briefing should be fast.
All right, then judge briefing first.
Awesome. So I'll just wait for Lucia to share my slides and then I will begin. Okay. So to begin with the judge briefing, obviously it's based on the same manual as Lucia used because we are thankfully using the Korea updated manual, and thanks our friends for in Korea Ajko for making those updates. So there will be some degrees of overlap, but I will make more specific comments that are connecting these to judges and their roles. So can we move on to the first slide, like to the next slide? So first, some technical things. The deliberation time takes 15 minutes, like in every tournament that you're used to. This means that the ballot needs to be submitted, not only the decision reached. So please keep 2 times by the end of the deliberation to do speaker scores and make sure that you have time to submit your ballot. The oral adjudication should also take about 15 minutes. If you want to give extra feedback to teams, which we absolutely encourage, please be available in your free time to do that. Do not use oral education time for personal feedback unless you have sufficient time left for it. Thirdly, the chair has the authority to lead the discussion, and in a tie chair, in a tie decision, the chair has a decisive vote. So if it's a 2 versus 2, chair is a tiebreaker. Otherwise, chair contributes like other participants of the panel. Trainees, we'll have them in many of the panels. They can be included in discussion, but they do not vote. They can be promoted by us by feedback. So to be clear, someone who's a trainee on round 1 can become a wing by round 2 if we see that they have exceedingly good feedbacks. However, this is only something the CAs cannot do based on feedbacks. This is not a decision that chair judge can do to give a trainee the right to vote. If someone was a trainee at the beginning of the panel, they will be left a trainee by the end of it. Can we move to the next slide? Speaker scores. So we'll be using the same scale as used in Korea Worlds in Athens and Astana EC, etc. We encourage everyone to use the scale. It means you should use the scale in front of you while you do deliberation, if possible, to actually look at the brackets and give them as accurately as possible. Please remember, speaker scores are important and should be discussed and considered because they impact breaks on close points. Use the full range. The go farther than between 70 and 80. So go lower or higher when it is deserved. In the case of a roll or a split, all judges can still participate in the discussion regarding speaker scores, but the score is still decided by the majority of the panel and should not attempt to reflect the disagreement. That means if there was a split between the second and the third, it does not necessarily mean the second and the third was a close call that should have 1 speaker point difference. It could still be something that the majority of the panel thinks have 5 speaker point difference and think it is very clear. The fact that minority of the panel thinks that it could have been read otherwise should be reflected in speaker scores. That being said, obviously it could also be a close call. This is not meaning that you should always just ignore closeness, that rather that a heuristic that you cannot use is whether or not there was a split. Also, speaker scores should reflect teams' positions in the debates. Please double check your ballots. A team cannot get accumulated amount of speaks that is lower than a team that has lost to them or higher than a team that has won them. So make sure that your speaks align with the positions you give. Next slide. POIs. POIs are up to 15 seconds or up until the speaker cuts them down midway through. If a POI was cut down midway through, the judge is expected to evaluate if a sufficient time was given to evaluate the POI. That is, could the point of the speaker be understood from the POI in the time that was given for it? If this is not the case, you should treat this as though a POI was not taken at all. POI is credited holistically like any other part of the debate. We credit it both for speaker scores and for the call itself. It is treated like any other rebuttal or instructive material. And here, advice in relation to this, POIs, because they are limited in time, are usually extra attempted by teams to be worded well and to be very concise. So they are an extremely important part of the comparison quite often. Please write them down as judges. Please make sure that you discuss them during the deliberation. Please make sure that when you give feedbacks on other judges, you address whether or not they take into consideration what was said in POIs. POIs should, we expect teams to take 3 POIs overall throughout the 2 speeches, with at least 1 from each house, that is the top half and the bottom half, especially on diagonals. To be clear, this does not mean a team automatically loses the comparison if they did not take a POI. It does penalize them a bit in engagement, which is also a metric we give speaker scores based on, so do count this in terms of their speaker scores, but also it counts in close comparisons to see how much of a fair chance of engagement the other side had to have. This is particularly true for diagonals. Please note, this was a question on the judge test as well that we see that a lot of people got confused by. Not taking a POI on a close comparison between the top half and the bottom half will very often mean that the top half would get the benefit of the doubt of not having had a fair chance to engage with the bottom half. This does not mean they automatically win, but rather this could be a tipping point in an otherwise extremely close call. In addition, please also note that POIs do not have to, in themselves, include the entirety of the engagement between teams and diagonals. This is important. It would be a bit unfair to say that OG only gets 15 seconds to engage with CO. Presumably, they preempted a lot of what was going to come in bottom half. And often POIs, like was exemplified in the judge test, would flag back to material that was said during speeches. We expect you, as judges, to also go back to things that were said preemptively and see how new material interacts with old material, and not base the entirety of the engagement on diagonals only on what was said explicitly on POIs. Lastly, chess should also comment between speeches if a POI was not taken. So no need to be rude about it, but hey, just a reminder, a POI was not taken during this speech. We highly encourage everyone to take POIs, and this will be taken into consideration in both call and speaker scores. Next slide. Okay. The globally informed voter. So Lucia already touched upon this. I won't go too much into depth about things that were already said, but just some nuances to understand for judges. Obviously, it comes from no particular country, does not understand technical vocabulary or jargon, regardless of what you know. You having read something recently does not mean that you should credit or discredit an argument based on this. If a rebuttal was not said in the debate, but you know that an argument is false in real life, if the average intelligent voter is not expected to know this, so aren't you, and vice versa. If an argument was not analyzed, but you know it to be true, you should still not credit it. The globally informed voter does not have preformed views about any topic. This includes A, not having preformed views in terms of do I support or oppose the motion, but also does not have preformed views in terms of kinds of arguments that we like more. The globally informed voter doesn't arbitrarily prefer principles to practicals or vice versa. They are evaluating them holistically and equally. They do not have any preference for accent, style, or type of arguments given, structure also included. Another question that was confusing to some people in the judge test. To be clear, teams are encouraged to have good structure. However, we as judges still have the full responsibility to do our best attempt to follow a messy speech. We cannot excuse ourselves by saying the globally informed voter wouldn't follow this. The judge, as the globally informed voter, is still very logical and still tries very hard to listen, even if we know that sometimes the globally informed voter is a bit less likely to listen to people who are not tidy or less likely to care about logics. Or in other words, the globally informed voter is not stupid. They have not a lot of knowledge on many things, but they still understand logic and they still try to listen, and we still do our best as judges to understand and follow what was said. Lastly, we do not correct for seemingly biased motions. So the globally informed voter should be a metric that you use to assess whether or not knowledge or values from within the debate is something that the globally informed voter believes in or knows to be true. You do it only for arguments, not for the motion itself. We have tried our very best to give you a good motion set that we hope to be sufficiently balanced based on our previous testing. However, if at any point you disagree with us, that is, of course, your right. Please do not reward or penalize for it. If you think a motion is, say, up heavy, do not give a lower burden of proof to team proposition or give them extra speaks to correct for this. This is our job as CAs to care about balance, your job to only evaluate as judges whether or not the argument is sufficiently proven within the debate. Next slide. Time and place. So as Lucia said already, motions take place in functioning democracies, and there is no place setting or time setting allowed. One quick note that I've known confuses people often in previous competitions about specifically the context of COVID, because debates are assumed to be contemporary unless said otherwise, meaning that we don't only defend them for the next couple of years. So how do you address it given that we are currently amidst a pandemic? This is a very weird time. We assume the debate to continue taking place unless specified otherwise, after COVID stops happening. So you cannot give an argument such as, in the current day and age, the proposed motion is a waste of time and resources that should be focused on overcoming the harms of COVID. This is something that could be relevant in specific debates which are relevant to this, or about the pandemic, or about the next couple of years, but otherwise assume the policy takes place afterwards and you are expected to either support or oppose the motion in its entirety for the next perceivable future. However, you are still aware that it exists and can use it in examples and arguments, because the globally informed voter obviously knows that there's a pandemic. So you can say things like, times of crisis often lead to a rise in authoritarian policies. We can see example of this in the reaction of many regimes to COVID-19. Next slide, please. Contradictions. Contradictions are any statements that are made either inside the same team between one speaker and the other speaker, inside the same speech between a speaker to the same speaker themselves 2 minutes ago, or between two teams on the same bench. Contradictions are a statement or an argument that goes in contradiction or in like tension to things that were said previously by another speaker on the bench. Generally speaking, contradictions are not allowed, and the entire bench is expected to hold a consistent stance without contradicting each other. That is to give the teams a fair chance to engage and not needing to engage contradictory claims. Several things on that. We do not credit contradicting material made by a team or a speaker. However, we also don't actively penalize for it unless they are done in a manner that does active harm. So this is a nuance that is important. Generally speaking, contradictions are something that we just ignore and don't write down. There are cases where a contradiction is made in a way that gives a concession to the other team. This is only in the case that it was not just said in a statement, but actually analyzed, when it can actively harm a case of the same team. But in most part, we just actively ignore it. In general, we only treat contradictions insofar as they were a fully analyzed thing, as opposed to just a slip of the tongue. So like if someone says, I beg you to oppose, this is not a contradiction that we actually care about. We treat the thing that was said chronologically earlier as the thing that is going to stand within the debate. We still credit contradictions that are, we are still crediting material that is not part of the contradiction. So a team giving a contradicting claim to their opening doesn't mean that they automatically lose to their opening or get an automatic fourth or anything else. We can still credit the other parts of their extension and speech which are not contradicting. Contradictions should also be discredited by judges, even if they are not pointed out in rebuttal by the opposing bench. Meaning, if you notice a contradiction, you should ignore it regardless of whether or not it was explicitly said. To be clear, there are very few versions of legitimate contradictions. This is in the case of either, one, a model was given that was challenged, CG is allowed to accept the challenge. If the judges, however, do not accept the challenge and believe OG's model, CG will fall with OO together. But in general, if a model was challenged, CG is not necessarily bound to it and can contradict it. Secondly, if something was said that is blatantly false in real life factually, and globally informed voter knows this is something that you can contradict, unless you can contradict metrics. So you cannot contradict an analysis that was given a truism or falsism of something that your opening half said. You can, however, if your top half said, the most important clash in this debate is the practical, say, no, the most important clash in this debate is the principle. This is technically a contradiction, but obviously if bottom half couldn't have done this, bottom half couldn't have won ever on weighing. So this is something that you are allowed to do. Otherwise, contradictions are not allowed. Next slide. Extensions. Extensions can be any form of new material coming in members, including new arguments, new rebuttals, new examples, new lines of analysis for existing arguments. This was a part that I see many people got confused by in the judge test. To be clear, you can not fully analyze a otherwise unanalyzed argument. So if member said a headline, you cannot give analysis for this in width. However, if member already analyzed the argument to a sufficient extent, it is legitimate for the whip to add a couple of new mechanisms to it and new lines of analysis insofar as it was sufficiently substantiated in member. Whip can also add new applications of Extensions can also be like new applications of existing arguments, and they can also be a new metric or criteria to judge the debate. A couple of things on extensions and how to evaluate them. A, they need to be meaningful. We do not use a tick box of saying a team had an extension, so they win, or a team did not have an extension, so they lose. You can have an extension and it can still be deemed less important than the opening half's existing material and lose to it. So an extension needs to be meaningful, not just new. Secondly, it does not have to be actively weighed. It is encouraged, and we encourage teams to explain why their extension is meaningful. However, judges are expected to try and understand what was more contributing to win the debate, even if an extension was not explicitly weighed. Next slide. Whips. What whips can and cannot do? A, they cannot add new arguments. B, as I said earlier, they cannot add new analysis for an otherwise unanalyzed argument. They can, however, add new mechanisms for an already analyzed argument. They can add new rebuttals. They can add new examples for existing arguments, and they can add new impacts and weighings. Couple of notes on what should or shouldn't be counted as new material in WIP, because I think this is often a gray area in debating and something that confuses people. First, I see people often, and this was also something I noticed from some of your comments, referring to the judge manual on what counts as an extension when thinking what counts as new material. This is intuitive, but doesn't always work. To give a clear example of this, the judge manual very clearly explicitly says that a new rebuttal can still be an extension. However, we all also know that whips can obviously add new rebuttals. So not everything that counts as an extension counts as new material necessarily. This is why also having new analysis is not always, even though it is often, new material in whip. So second note, how do we rule in those gray areas? As a rule of thumb, ask yourself, how reasonable was it of other speakers within the debate to expect the material coming in whip before they have heard whip? So this can be using many aiding factors to decide this. For example, was it something that was very obvious to come within the debate because it is like something that you expect teams to understand? Or is it completely new, innovative, and creative, and no one could have thought on this? Is it similar to already existing analysis coming in member? Even if it is a new mechanism, it can still have similar lines to things that were said in member, or is it completely differing from the way that the member analyzed this? Ask any question that can help you guide yourself. If the other teams had never heard the whip speech, could they have expected the whip would say those things? Lastly, similar to predictions, new material should be ignored. It should not be actively penalized. We just treat it as though the speaker did not say anything in the time that they gave new material. Next slide. Briefly through motion types, again, Lucia did a lot of this. I will do the things that are specific just to understand here. Okay, policy, OG has model fiat, OO has counterprop fiat, efficacy, not something that is a given within the debate. Analysis, this house believes that. There is no model fiat, but there is a definition fiat for OG to define what is within the debate. Prop has a fiat to assume that the motion is feasible. It does not have fiat to assume that it will be a good idea. So you can assume that you will do something, but you cannot assume that you will do it necessarily in the best way possible. This was an example given also in your judge test, when a proposition can support or oppose the practice of shaming. They have some fiat to say, under our side, we defend the world with more or less shaming. What they do not have fiat to say is we only talk about bad shaming or good shaming. They need to analyze what is likely to happen in real life. You cannot define the utility. This is not within your fiat. Next slide. Types of analysis motions. So there are several sub-versions of analysis motions. Other than this house believes that, we also have this house supports or this house opposes. So the proposition needs to support or oppose the motion accordingly, and the opposition needs to oppose or support the motion accordingly. This house prefers X over Y. Proposition defends X, opposition defends Y. There is no third alternative. You cannot refer to the status quo instead. You cannot decide that you defend a Z as a third option. This house believes that X should do Y. X is the actor that executes policy Y. However, the perspective remains a global one, and you still don't have a model fiat. As an example, if a motion would say this house believes that the US should invade Syria, we talk about whether or not it is a good idea in the global context for the US to do this. We do not necessarily prioritize the US's incentives over other actors, nor do we define how the US does it. We need to analyze how it is likely to do. Next slide. Regret. In regret motions, proposition regrets the motion and opposition defends the status quo. The counterfactual should be analyzed by teams. No one gets to define the counterfactual, and teams do get the benefit of hindsight. So this is an important note for judges. If teams talk about something that factually happened throughout history, they do not need to prove that it would have likely happened. They can just say it happened if the globally informed voter knows it. They don't have, however, the ability to just assume it happened as a result of the motion. They don't get to assume causality. Actor motions. This house as X would do Y, or you are X, this house would do Y, and any other variation of this. X can be an individual, community, movement, state, or any other actor. Teams should analyze from the perspective of X and their incentives, meaning that we do not credit arguments that are about the global good, not connected back directly to the incentive of the actor. However, do note two important things on this. A, the perspective of the actor does not have to be a cynical one. Actors can have moral incentives as well. While we know that many debaters are very strong cynics, we can still say that an actor cares about their obligation towards certain people, the guilt that they might feel, etc. So principled arguments can still be within the debate insofar as they are connected to the perspective of the actor. Secondly, note that while we expect teams to connect things back to the incentive of the actor, this does not need to be done in the explicit manner in the headline. A team that does not have a headline that is called the incentives of X, or I'll characterize what are the actor's incentives, does not necessarily lose the debate. They can still have integrated within their analysis explanations on why the actor is impacted by it. In these debates, OG still has model fiat, but the fiat is limited to the one of the actor. So, for example, in this house, as a vegan would preach and try to solicit their friends to convert to veganism, you cannot say we'll put taxes on meat products because you're not the state. You can model how the individual vegan would do this. So we can give like links to like lectures about this, etc. Next slide. Okay, quickly on definitions. Not going very deeply through what teams should consider here. In terms of judges, generally, a model that was given within the debate stands insofar as it was not challenged. If it is challenged, you need to decide whether or not the challenge is legitimate, or in other words, is the original model the legitimate one or not. Several pointers on when a model is illegitimate. If it is one, overly narrowing the debate. To be clear, teams are allowed usually to exclude extreme examples, but they are not allowed to make the debate about a very small subset of the population that it should be about. Secondly, if it does not actually change the status quo or too similar to the status quo. Thirdly, if it requires the opposition to defend an undefendable burden, to be clear, this does not mean that you should again try to reward teams that are on the side of the debate that you think is biased against you, but rather that you should still not credit a part of the model that is trying to put a burden on the opposition that is not an inherent part of the debate. Lastly, a definition is not in the spirit of the motion. Definitions can be given exclusively in PM. Challenges can be given exclusively in leader of opposition. Okay, I'm to brush through it a bit quickly. I have 3 less slides, so I'll do it very fast. Challenges can be given in leader of opposition. Leader of opposition is expected to explain why it is illegitimate, and the panel decides whether or not to explain it. Next, on counter props, leader of opposition is also allowed to provide an alternative model to the one in the debate. Insofar as it is given, now opposition is bound to the alternative model as opposed to the status quo. This is on the next slide. So from that moment on, CO, DLO, no other speaker in the debate can go back to defending the status quo. All speakers are bound to the counterprop. Only leader of opposition can provide a counterprop. You cannot do this in DLO or CO. And lastly, counterprops are also limited by the same rules of legitimacy as models. So can we go to the last slide, please? Another one. Yeah. So A, counterprop should still be in the spirit of the motion, not too similar to the government stance, etc. It has the same fiat as the original proposition. This means that you are not allowed to have a stronger counterprop than the original model, and this also means that motions that don't have model fiat, like analysis motions, regret motions, also don't have counterprop fiat. They need to be mutually exclusive with the motion. They should still be in the spirit of the motion and oppose it. You cannot outprop proposition, and like a model, a counterprop can be challenged by the DPM to be decided if it is legitimate or not. That is it for judges.
Hi everyone, I'm going to do the equity briefing. So I'm going to be quite quick about this. There's an equity policy posted online, which I hope you all read with lots of enthusiasm. But just a couple of quick reminders if you either read it immediately when it posted or if you have some questions. So the first thing we're saying is since this is a tournament with lots of stress, people are very nervous. Sometimes you just make mistakes and you do stuff that you're not actually very happy with, or a speaker says something to you that you feel uncomfortable with. And our recommendation there is we really hope that people kind of talk to each other. You tell that person that they offended you, or you apologize for your mistakes if you made one, and you try to solve it yourself first. Especially kind of taking into account the fact that this is for many people online, that this is very nerve-wracking to speak at Euros or to judge at Euros. So just give each other a little bit of space to apologize and to say sorry. The second thing that we're really recommending is that everyone tries to prevent themselves from having too many generalizations in speeches. I mean, if you listen to the very extensive judge and speaker briefings, obviously there are debate reasons to do this, but I think secondly, you just want to be mindful of what other people are experiencing and have experienced. And then lastly, because it is online, please be mindful that your behavior that would normally maybe be okay can now feel intimidating. Think about stuff like POIs. I think there's a part in the tech briefing that explains that most POIs should be asked through chat unless the speaker says otherwise, but just in general, kind of be aware that if you speak over someone during the debate, that stuff is more difficult during an online tournament compared to an offline tournament. And I think lastly, what we really want to stress, equity is obviously about the things where there's issues and stuff doesn't go right. But given that it's an online tournament, lots of people have not spoken at offline tournaments yet. People maybe don't know as many speakers as other times. Just kind of take care of each other, look out for each other, and make sure you, I don't know, have fun at socials and don't just talk to the people that you already know. When it comes to equity, obviously we're going to be very available for you to talk to us if you just want to have a discussion or just kind of get something off your chest, or if you have an actual equity issue where you want us to take action. All of that is fine. We're going to post a schedule of equity officers which are available at every moment. But in general, just send us a Discord message or send us a Facebook message, and then I think that would work best. And then you can also just say at equity in general, and then the person who's available at that time will send you a message. And if nobody responds, Orgcom has our numbers, so you can also ask Orgcom and they can call us. We have 2 people who speak Spanish, so if there's very specific like Madrid issues, you can also ask them, and they will also be able to help you. And again, I'll post all of our names and the ways to contact us in the chat. And then the last thing, just a reminder, we're doing gender pronouns at this tournament. I hope everyone knows what that means, but it basically means that Cher will ask you for your preferred gender pronouns, and you can give them. So for me, that would mean, hi, I'm Emma, I'm going to be your judge in this particular round. My gender pronouns are she, and just please listen to them. If you make a mistake, that's again fine, but please apologize, and making fun of the gender pronoun policy is not acceptable. So please don't do that. And I think that's it. So go, I don't know, I think there's a tab and Orcom announcements after this. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you for all the team that has made all the briefings. Thank you, everyone, for being on the opening ceremony. Sorry for the technical issues and the tiny delay. So right now, we can officially say that we can start Madrid UDC 2021. So hopefully, we hope that you have fun. And if you need anything, you can approach us on Discord, on WhatsApp for the offlines, or in person here if you are here in Madrid. And yeah,